So I'm Dr. Halasa. I'm the founder of Chronic Disease Prevention and Management, and we're going to talk about insulin doping. But we have a question here about genetics. Yes, so we are very in genetics. Some people have genetic genomic SNPs, which is not good, and at different degree. And so we are not all equal in genetically, and
Well,
that's
well,
the reason
put
some
it like
people have
this.
more prone to get sick than others. And
Well,
because of the genetics plus the environmental combination. Does that make sense?
well, I can tell you where I've arrived at, where I'm at now, is that all of these genetic SNPs are not like, oh, I'm sorry, you've got this, you've got this inferior genetics. What I see, and perhaps there's something to be said. Maybe you get a mutation and it's just you're out of luck. What I tend to see is every strength has a weakness. And those whose weaknesses, whose genes are not designed to thrive during the most toxic time in our history as we know it, that's look, you can have a strength, and that's the weak because the strength produces oxidative stress. The strength that be able to think while you're sick, that's a strength. The sickness comes from the toxins and the chronic Lyme and the mold, the mycotoxins, and the contaminated food and the air and the water and the whole thing, everything that we talk about, especially me. That's not a weakness. That's a strength that is damaged, that's not designed to deal with an extremely abnormal environment. Extreme, like terrible, like an ionized atmosphere. No, my genetics weren't designed for it. So I'm not so certain that it's a weakness. It's unfortunate, but what comes with it is the thinking. It's the price for being able to think. And if there's anybody that can think, you better believe who it is. And the price is severe fatigue. Severe, because no, my body doesn't process heavy metals floating in the air and graphene and all that stuff. It doesn't process it well because it's not supposed to. Apparently, my genes didn't deal with that stuff. Think about it from that standpoint. Probably was strong, designed to fight, you know, real pathogens, not fake pathogens. So I just want to throw that out. It's just something that occurred to me as a way to consider. It's not saying it's proven, but look, if you were the one who was sick, you would, and people had all kinds of smart ideas for you to do that didn't make sense, and they're talking down to you, you would feel exactly the same. And and if you had a snip, you wouldn't necessarily consider it, oh, well, bummer, luck of the draw. I'm just an inferior genetically designed person. No, it might be a strength masked by a weakness that's not designed for this environment. So, anyways,
Yeah,
that's my
I
take.
think what happened is that, although there's genetic SNPs and variations between individuals, but also, as you said, the will to survive and also coming up with solutions to overcome the SNPs. And I think example is you coming up with a lot of solutions to overcome any SNPs that you have, and you supercharge yourself. That is a gift, with determination, will, and understanding, and how your body works, and how to overcome all those genetic SNPs. But if somebody is not you, Dr. Joseph, with willness that you have and education that you have, he will be debilitated because he doesn't have the intelligence enough to fight and overcome the SNPs that person has. And so it's we can work and we optimize even people with genetic SNPs. We can optimize them, find out what's the problem, and see how we can provide them with treatments that they are deficient in, and or supplements, or any difficult varieties of those protocols and modalities that we are recommending here. But what triggered this lecture is when I went to Dr. Stefan, and I went to his clinic, and I was seeing his patients together. We've been seeing patients together, and then we find out a patient, he is using insulin and to buff his muscles. And at that time, I was not that happy. But at the same time, when you're dealing with people who did it before and doing it, um, there is a way that you can detour their approach and thinking, but it's a process. So I think Stefan is in the position where he can talk to that patient and take him away from doing insulin duping, because it causes a lot of problems, and that's what we're going to talk about it. I mean, and you can see, there's a little YouTube kind of show where his name is Anatoly, and he's, I think, from Ukraine, and he comes to the gyms, and then he act like a cleaner and wearing um, wearing clothes of being a worker there, and he start cleaning things, and he doesn't have that buffy muscles versus the people who are lifting weight with buffy muscles, and he lifts those weight, but his sizes of muscle is not as big as those people with buffy muscles. And what's that mean? That means this guy muscles is not its real muscles, and their myosin and actin is being mature enough and is being built on the direction of the stress, versus immature random myosin and actin inside the cells, and you have a lot of number, yes, but it's not aligned, it's not mature, it's not lining up with the stress. You can say it's a random and everywhere in every direction. It just the muscle looks big, but there's no strength there. And so those muscles that's being built by mTOR stimulation, without exercising and without stressing and without physiologically stimulation of mTOR, synthetically being pushed by mTOR, whether it is insulin or other mTORs, most of the time their muscles are weak and they can tear easily, and they end up with a lot of spasm, and that's what he's complaining. He's saying, I'm feeling my muscles are pain and spasm and possibly minor tears. And the reason, because his muscles are not strong. It's not built normally. It's a fake. And why? Because he's pushing the mTOR stimulation with those chemicals. Let's say, for example, we can say insulin, and it's an exogenous insulin. And yes, it will push the sugar, it will build up glycogen, and it will build up proteins and fat inside those muscles. But those proteins are not mature, they're not lining up with the stress of the muscles, they're not strong enough, and they can break easily. And so they're putting themselves into risk of hypoglycemia. Some end up with attack of even, hypoglycemia to the point of death, or arrhythmia, because when you're pushing too much of sugar in, you are pushing also the potassium, you end up with hypokalemia, you may end up with arrhythmia. And so there is a risk there. Plus, when you are increasing the muscles, the skeletal muscles, also increasing your heart muscles, and you end up with hypertrophy of the heart and cardiomyopathy. So it's a short-term gain of showing up big muscles, but it's a long-term health disaster, especially with the heart and even the blood vessels. There's a risk they will increase the blood pressure because it will stimulate the smooth muscles as well. So I don't recommend giving insulin like this, or even giving mTOR in a way that they're doing. But there is a way that you can give those mTOR stimulators, but it has to be done in a very it has to be done under the supervision of the doctors. where when you give the mTOR, you need to exercise, plus you need to have some fasting and some anti-mTOR or to inhibit the mTORs. You need to give also something that to inhibit the mTOR so that when you're giving those mTOR stimulations, including insulin, you're not stimulating senescent cells and cancer cells and inflammasomes. You need to clear them up. So you need to do this some sort of cycling, and you have to go through a regimen. But I think it's enough if we just optimize the sex hormone, making sure that testosterone is at the level of needed, and the patient, the person is exercising, and we have balanced sex hormone. Yes, I think that's a good thing. But exercise-induced mTOR, it's way better than drug-induced mTOR. But I don't know if Stefan, if you want to come up and say, hey, I'm using mTOR. Are you using mTOR to build up your muscle? Because I can see your muscle is more naturally exercise induced more than chemical. Are you there, Stefan?
Yes,
What do you think?
it's true. The bodybuilders use insulin because it's a high mTOR stimulating molecule. It's the most anabolic hormone there is, and they use it with a large carbohydrate protein shake. So the idea is the carbohydrates and the protein get shuttled into the muscle through insulin, and so that's how they use it. And yeah, I think it creates a large puffy look. It makes them look very full. Well, they describe it as the most full they feel. The pump is unreal with that. And you're right. It creates kind of a fake muscle. I think it puts a lot of fat into the muscle and it stores a lot of glycogen into the muscle. So they get a massive fullness appearance from this. But it's not a very strong muscle. So it's not great for, I think, powerlifting at all. It's mostly what bodybuilders use, not the powerlifters.
Right, but you don't use insulin doping or mTOR. Your body, slim like and naturally, the guy who's coming and making fun of those big muscles people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're doing the same thing because you have in the gym and you're exercising and you're reducing it by exercise and strength. And yes, you're optimizing, you're making sure your sex hormone is optimal as much as you can. That's fine. I'm okay
Right.
with it because it's a natural testosterone as much as you can do, and you feed your gonads to produce those testosterone. But any things come from synthetic. I really think it's not a right thing to do, and
No, it's not a right thing to do, but we can use that as a principle for ourselves and our patients with training. So you got to
right.
tell the patients that the carbohydrate that you consume, that fuels your muscles to perform a great workout. Because if you eat carbohydrate and protein and you work out, you have great results. That's what it's for. And the patient that just eats the carbohydrate and sits around sedentary, that energy gets stored as fat. That gets stored on the liver. That gets stored on the heart. That's visceral fat. If you combine the carbohydrate with the training, that's the optimal result. And so then you actually build the muscle this way.
Right, right. Um, the carbohydrates, I think because we have enough of carbohydrate in the fruit and vegetables, and in the beans, and in the meat. Do you think that do we need to eat wheat if we have vegetables and fruit and meat and beans and nuts? Don't you think they contain enough of carbohydrates in those food that we don't need to eat bread anymore?
No, but if you want to eat bread, you need to be training very hard. I don't think the general population needs to be consuming a bunch of bread. They should probably be consuming, yes, complex carbohydrate with lots of fiber in it that can help decrease the glycemic load. I mean, rice, bread, it tastes great. It's very anabolic because it increases the insulin so much in the body, but you need to be training if you're consuming those sort of big carbohydrates.
Let's say for people who are sitting in the office, and this is like majority of us, 80% of the Americans, they don't really have labor work. Don't you think that they don't need it because of their work that they do?
Correct. They should be eating things like garbanzo beans or chickpeas or lentils. They should be eating, squash, sweet potatoes. These have more fiber in them. They're slower glycemic releasing. The white rice and the breads, and even smoothies. A lot of patients, they think they're doing great by drinking a smoothies, which is bananas, and they usually put a mango in there, and they drink this thinking it's great. It's not though. it's a huge glucose bolus, which is
Right.
what it is.
Well, again, insulin, it's not just building and stimulating mTOR when it's high. It also stimulates NOx enzyme and generate free radicals and pathological free radicals. Now, when it spikes and it goes down, that's fine. You produce a physiological free radical spark that you need to stimulate the synthesis of protein. But when it's high and constant, and that's where the problem is, then you are constantly stimulating pathological free radicals, same like you're putting yourself under a tower of EMF where, opening up calcium channels, generating constant high free radicals. And so those anabolics, yes, they stimulate mTOR, but also they stimulate free radicals, and it needs to be done physiologically as much as we can, and also it needs to be lining up with physical stress to justify those free radicals that they generate. Otherwise, it can become sickening, and it will damage the blood vessels and causing atherosclerosis. And so the risk is very clear for people who are doing insulin doping. They have risk of hypoglycemia, hypokalemia, cardiac arrhythmia, and because they generate free radicals, because stimulating up an ox, so they inhibiting the insulin receptors, and that leads to chronic insulin resistance. And doing so, insulin itself, when it's high and all that, it stimulates fibrosis and it stimulates damage of the parenchyma. So it leads to accelerating of aging. Aging basically is fibrosis and replacing the fibrotic tissue or replacing the parenchyma with the fibrosis in each and every organ of your body. So we need to consider measuring insulin, making sure it's less than 10. And if you want to become superhuman, it has to be less than 5, and you have to build muscles in order to get that level like Dr. Stefan has, which is number 2. I mean, that's like the best insulin level that you can get. Ethically, I think it's non-medical prescription misuse, and there's high morbidity there. There's zero clinical indication, and also it's a cheating as well. It's unfair, having buffy muscles like this and showing up muscles. Yeah, but if you go and check his heart, you will see he has hypertrophy in his heart, and also he has a high risk of having hypertension because of the stimulation of the smooth muscles as well of the blood vessels, and they get narrowed. So in addition to the damage that's happening in the endothelium because of the stimulation of NOx and generation of free radicals, which cause the damage of the endothelium as well. So there's physician liability there, athlete liability. So it's off-label. I will not encourage that, and I think the mini clinic that Stefan has, I think it's phenomenal. And that's the reason I'm I want to work with you, especially with the Superhuman Society. And it's yours. You're gonna charge the patients, but we are just trying to encourage people to become healthy and provide them a platform where they can talk to each other like here, and understanding why this method is not wrong, insulin doping is wrong, and coming up, with better healthy food, and possibly, having affiliates of restaurants that encourage healthy restaurants, and encouraging transformation of the way that we are living currently. And I think RFK is actually pushing that. And just recently came up and say, hey, no more carbohydrate. It's the lower thing you do is, eat more of meat and proteins and fat, saturated fat. They've been demonized for a long period of time because their idea is that the fat they eat, it deposits into the blood vessels, right? But also too much of fat is not good. So we have to be balancing, because if you absorb too much of fat or eat too much of fat, it can cause the blood to be thickened. So that's not something you want to do. It has to be balanced, a balanced food with low carb, because we're already being bombarded with a lot of carb. And also, we need to make sure that we detox the body from all this estrogen mimics, because all these petrochemicals that we're living around, whether if you go to your house, it's a petrochemical bubble. You cannot avoid it. All the plastics, all the sheets, the clothes is all plastics, and all of those are are estrogen mimics, and those estrogen mimics are inducing, by the way, it induce insulin, and it induce cortisol, because estrogen mimics, or estrones and estrogen mimics, it does work in positive feedback loop with cortisone and with insulin. They help to push each other, increase each other. And so, doing your best in avoiding as much as exposure to those environmental contaminants, whether it is the microplastic or it's the EMF or whatever, it's something healthy to do. And also eating the healthy food, not the junk foods. It's very important. And low carb, because we're already being bombarded with a lot of high carb food already in our life. So rapid rise in insulin misuse across elite sports, bodybuilders, and anti-aging community. There is misuse there, trying to puff their muscles, disproportional high morbidity and mortality with alarming low public and professional awareness, and sudden death, mostly because of the cardiomyopathy effect of it, hypertrophy of the muscles of the heart. Poor detectability in routine anti-doping and toxicology screening, enabling silence of use. Nobody's asking about it. And I think that patient, what we saw, and also it's not just that, it increased the visceral fat as well. And that visceral fat is inflammation. Any extra fat that you see in the belly, that extra fat is actually a grave of it's a storage house of inflammatory cytokines, and it's the reason why we have insulin resistance. So make sure that when we're doing the superhuman society thing, we make sure that the men is less than 100 centimeter and women less than 80, and their body mass index has to be optimized, all of this. And we will let the clinicians to do all of that. Basically, we are just getting qualified physicians all over the states, and then we will share the protocols together. We agree on it. So that's why it's a teamwork, as Dr. Joseph is trying to say. We have to work as a team. It's not about yourself. If you want to get the sum of all of our work, then you need to give and take, not just thinking, oh, what's for me? What's for me? And I think that message we learned from Dr. Joseph today. Widespread misconception of insulin as safe, natural, or benign when used outside the medical indication. It's not just the misuse that's happening by the athletic people, but also we can escalate that to the misuse that's being used by the doctors professionally, and the endocrinologists, and the system of the health system, where when they have diabetic type 2 and the patient is not compliant with his food and is not doing well with his oral antihypoglycemic, and his sugar is up, then we say, oh, okay, so let's go ahead and move you from metformin to insulin. Your metformin is not working. Let's go ahead and give you insulin. And they give insulin with no caps. Instead of looking why his metformin does not work, what he's eating, and looking at his diet and change his diet and keep him on and improving the insulin sensitivity. No, they don't even look at insulin sensitivity or any chance of that. They don't look at what the patient is eating, whether he's eating the highest carb out there, 20 liters of Coke. No, we're going to just switch you to the insulin, right? And that's the problem when there's no effort to increase insulin sensitivity, and doctors is going to ahead and give them insulin with no cap. No cap. Do you know that the endocrinologist can give insulin with no cap as long as it's lowering the sugar? Their goal is to lower the sugar and hemoglobin A1C. Give them as much as insulin. The reason, because they have no clue that insulin itself, it's as bad as sugar. In fact, the sugar itself, it's not harmful, but when it oxidizes, it's harmful. What makes it to be oxidized is insulin when it stimulates the NOx enzyme. Generate free radicals, oxidize the sugar, and that's what become glycans. And yes, they are free radical generator. But the problem is in insulin. Insulin itself, it stimulates the mTOR, and it compromises the immune system and excessively stimulates the mTOR, including the inflammasomes, senescent cells, and cancer cells. And it put the patient at risk of cancer. Plus, it compromised the immune system. It inhibited the cytotoxic T cells and Th1, so it put you at risk of having viral infection and cancer and all the problems. And so, knowing that, if you talk to the endocrinologist, say no, insulin is a good thing because it will increase the blood vessels. It has angiogenesis effect, and that's what you need in patient with diabetic neuropathy. You want to increase their blood vessels, you give them insulin. So insulin is good. Well, that blood vessels that you are growing by insulin are bad blood vessels because they also stimulate NOx enzyme generating free radicals, so that free radical damage those blood vessels. So they are bad vessels. They're atherosclerotic, narrowed blood vessels, kinky, the same vessels that you see in the cancer. So it's not healthy. And it's the reason why they have atherosclerosis. And the reason why, patients with insulin and tight glucose and hemoglobin A1C, they end up with diabetic neuropathy and gangrene and amputations. And we understood that even from the endocrinologists admit themselves. They say, even if we tighten up all the glucose and all that stuff, it does not reduce the complications of diabetes, which indicate the problem and the culprit is the insulin. So that needs to be changed. We need to consider and look at how we can increase the insulin sensitivity. And increasing insulin sensitivity is not just by lowering the carb, but also by detoxing the body, because all the free radical generators can oxidize the insulin receptors and cause insulin resistance. So if there is leaky gut, if there is a problem with the microbiome of the skin, if there is leaky gum, just recently we have a very nice TV show about leaky gum, the health of the mouth, and how that liposaccharides and those bacteria toxins that's being released into the blood, it can oxidize those insulin receptors and cause insulin resistance. And insulin resistance causes increase in insulin, and that insulin will compromise the immune system, will cause a simulation of mTOR and putting that patient at risk of accelerating the cardiovascular disease, aging, and all that stuff. So we need to change that dynamic. And we need to ask those endocrinologists from now to stop giving insulin without cap and try to work on increasing insulin sensitivity, not just by lowering the carb intake, but looking at all sorts of inflammation in the body, all sorts of oxidative stress, and neutralize it. You neutralize the free radicals, you increase insulin sensitivity, and the patients will be feeling better, and you can wean patients from the insulin. Did it happen? Yes, I did. Myself, I did with many patients. I'm now weaning them from insulin and working on increasing insulin sensitivity by all different methods, by all integrative methods that we are learning with health optimization, not just lowering the carb, but looking for all the sources of free radicals and neutralize it. So widespread conception that insulin is safe, natural, or benign when used outside the medical indication, even inside the medical indication. That is needs to be fixed because it's not right what they are doing with treatment of insulin. Long-term metabolic, cardiovascular, neurological, and oncogenic sequence that persists long after the cessation of insulin. So it's already causing the damage. And to reverse all the damage, it takes time. But there is red lines, and hopefully that the patient did not pass that red line. It can be reversed with time if the patient is restoring or is getting back to the right lifestyle, right food, and also detoxing their body and using supplements to help in neutralizing those free radicals and restoring the health again. Insulin misuse represents one of the most underestimated and lethal form of modern performance enhancement. By the end of this lecture, you will understand insulin doping mechanism, recognize acute versus chronic dangers, and differentiate therapy versus abuse, and identify cancer and aging risk, which is insulin, and apply the CDPM metabolic alternate. So insulin doping is non-medical use of insulin, and they're using it to buff their muscles. And they, because insulin, what it does increase the glucose intake, which leads to glucagon storage and leads to fat storage and also protein storage. But those proteins are not mature, and their actin and myosin are just randomly like a mesh inside the muscles. They are not lining up with the stress. So they're very weak and they can torn easily and they can have a lot of muscle spasm and so it's not the right thing to do. So they're giving it not because they have diabetes or insulin deficiency or it's used for muscle fullness and recovery. It's high risk and there's no clinical indication. And it's super physiological exposure, which we don't need it because it is actually pathogenic to give them insulin. Um, we know insulin is a powerful anabolic hormone. It stimulates the mTOR like any others. It stimulates the liver to produce IGF, right? And it forces glucose to go in and build up the glycogen, sorry. It increases the glycogen and increases cell volume. Also, it increases the fat, building up the fat, inhibit lipolysis, and it's synergistic with human growth hormones and steroids. Talking about anabolic steroids. But again, it's not something that we want to do. Any abnormal amount of insulin, it can be pathogenic. No, normal physiological, we need it. We need that mTOR to stimulate regeneration. We need that spark of free radical physiological one that they produce to stimulate the gene expression. But if we end up giving them too much on pathological level, and you measure their fasting insulin, and it's above 10, that's not something that you want to sustain the patient with. Insulin is a storage hormone. It increases the glucose for glucose uptake, yes, but also it increases the resistance as well with time. It increases the glycogen synthesis, lipogenesis, protein synthesis, suppression of lipolysis, and it suppresses the autophagy. And you don't want that because if you suppress the autophagy, that's mean you're not able to kill the cancer and the cancer will grow. You're not able to kill inflammasomes. Cells contain inflammasomes, and then those inflammasomes will be source of inflammation. So it will sustain the inflammation. And it will sustain the senescent cells, and those senescent cells secrete chemicals that leads to aging. So we really need to get rid from them. And if the insulin is high, there's no chance for those cells to die, and they will continue inside the body producing all these inflammatory cytokines and contribute in degeneration and damaging and inflammation and sickness. And also, insulin is bad because it inhibits the mitochondria. Do you know that? Insulin inhibits the mitochondria. And then if you inhibit the mitochondria, you end up with lactic acids. That's what Dr. Joseph is saying, the acid terrain. That's where it is. That's a terrain. It's because of the insulin blocks the mitochondria. And when you block the mitochondria, pyruvic acid, they have no place to go, right? Because you block the Krebs cycle. And so they turn into lactic acid, they accumulate the blood. And yes, there is what Dr. Joseph is saying. If somebody is sick, his insulin is high, they will have what we call the acidic terrain. And that's the reason now the companies are looking to measure the lactic acid, to monitor and directly to monitor insulin, because there's a good correlation between insulin and lactic acid. The high insulin, the high lactic acid. And they cannot continue monitor this insulin, but they can continue monitor lactic acid. So we will have continued monitoring systems in the future soon, because they reach out to me, that we can know about the acidic train that Dr. Joseph is talking about. So he's predicting the future all the time. All the time he brings up new ideas.
Can I jump in there?
Yes, go ahead.
Just to paint the picture even more clear, because that's what happened, during my experience. I had that realization because there was a big, huge missing piece of the puzzle that I didn't understand. And by the way, getting the lactic acid levels, that being in the works, that's amazing, by the way, because I'll show you how I'm doing it now. But the big aha is that the terrain is outside the cell. It's really the interstitial space. And then you've got the intracellular space, which is governed more by redox. And the outside of the cell is governed more by acid base reactions, which is probably still the same thing. It's just that the outside of the cell is more acidic and the inside of the cell it's more alkaline, and the inside of the cell tends to be more acidic. Now, I don't know why, for some reason, I'm starting to doubt which one is what? But here's the big take home. The cell wall is polarized with being negative on the outside, more negative and more positive on the inside of the cell wall. Okay, which means the cytoplasm is probably the opposite. When you have too much acidity or an acidic terrain, the space outside of the cell, not including the blood vessels, the the protons are what take away the electrons on the outside of the cell, which results in decreasing the polarity of the cell wall, but that also affects the integrity over time. So you can think of it as acid terrain is like fermentation or a breaking down of things, because fermentation is fermenting is more of a breaking down process. And when that structural integrity gets compromised, that's when you have these receptor islands, they call them lipid rafts, start to get distorted or pushed up against each other. The toll-like receptors become more sensitive. Those will activate inflammation through oxidative stress pathways inside the cell. The ion channels get dysfunctional. You're unable to, like the sodium potassium pumps, you're unable to bring in sufficient potassium, which is required for the inside of the cell wall for that positive charge to that's required for that integrity. And so we're really what you're dealing with is leaky cell, like leaky gut, leaky cell, the leaky brain. But then also when this happens, you start to lose potassium. Once the structural integrity breaks down, you can imagine that it's like a building that's starting, the walls are starting to break down, and you get little holes in the wall. And now things can start to really leak, like magnesium, potassium, other very important minerals that really are responsible for maintaining the structural scaffolding. Like a building has a metal scaffolding, that's kind of how minerals can be seen on a atomic cellular level. And on a smaller level, they are the scaffolding for ATP, for the integrity of the mitochondria. Also, leaky mitochondria. Apparently, inside the mitochondria is a proton dense gradient as opposed to the outside of the inner membrane, because it's like a battery. And it also apparently contains a lot of potassium as well. And if that starts to leak out, well, think about it. Then you have this vicious cycle where if the mitochondria are not optimal and able to go through its electron transport chain and produce the ATP and to buffer the excess oxygen radicals and nitrous radicals, then the engine, the cellular machine will switch to producing lactic acid versus pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is what feeds the citric acid cycle in the mitochondria. And that lactic acid then gets pushed out of the cell because the cytoplasm is becoming too acidic. And so it has mechanisms that sort of push that excess acid out into the terrain, thus perpetuating the the acid terrain, which is breaking down the structural integrity from the outside. So the way that I kind of see this, then, we've got oxidative stress, which is governing, redox is governing the inside of the cell. Acid base is governing the outside of the cell. The structural integrity of the cell wall is dependent on the polarity for the most part, which is dependent on the oxidative stress and acid base balance um, on the outside and inside of the cell. And when that gets disrupted, like Dr. Halasa said, also, probably within those lipid rafts, those little islands of receptors, also those insulin receptors, they become not as functional. It may be conformational. It may be that again, when the cell wall loses its shape, it's not nice and round, it's becoming flattened or distorted. It could be that those receptors are pushed up against each other. And that makes them not functional or hypersensitive or not doing its job, not keeping the gradient, the polarity through the ion channels. And essentially, when somebody reaches the point where I call it the point of no return, they're no longer somebody that can just, you know, just, you know, you just got to eat right. You just got to exercise, which is usually the person who says that, by the way, doesn't really have anything else to say. Have you noticed that? They can't really tell you exactly what to eat or exactly what to do, or they can't relate with somebody who, say, they have a bad back. You know, the structural integrity, the straw that broke the camel's back. When the structural integrity is broken, the problem is that if you try to restore the mineral balance, the minerals won't stay in the cell because they're why? Because they're leaky. Well, how do you get the mitochondrial energy back if you cannot hold on to magnesium? Because that's required to hold ATP to stabilize it. Or if the mitochondria is leaking. Okay, that's where we also, that NT factor, those phospholipid supplements with the glycerol phospholipids, the different components of the cell wall and the organelles to help provide the actual structural components to repair the walls. That they did that study. Dr. Garth Nicholson, who wrote the original books on the mitochondria as we know it today, did the studies on the Gulf War veterans and found that they had mitochondrial dysfunction, damage to the walls, and their target was to restore the structural integrity. See how this all of a sudden for me, this came together. The acid terrain, the redox, the why the NT factor, why do we need the structural components? Probably also because the toxins also embed themselves in the cell wall matrix, leading to damage to the structural integrity. And those can be sort of almost like chelated, or those lipid products might actually wrap around those impurities and displace them and then replace the areas that were taken up by toxins in the wall, actually start to restore and fill in like almost like bricks to a brick building. And so then you can see, well, why do I have to have an alkaline diet? Nobody told me about that. How come I haven't heard about it? Because you haven't heard about it. Well, it makes sense in the sense that also the gut, the food inside the digestive tract, I mean, if it's acidic, then you've got an acid terrain in the gut. What do you think that's going to do to leaky gut? What do you think is going to be absorbed? Yeah, you're going to become more acidic. You're going to absorb that acidity into, that fermentation into the terrain. And so that's the purpose of the alkaline diet, is that they are foods that are basically, it's like a plant-based diet. I like how Stefan said when what is appropriate. That's a fine distinction, knowing that if you're going to have a carb dense meal or a snack of some sort, you need to realize that if you're not then doing it before a workout, that because of all of these other toxicities that we're dealing with, plastic, Dr. Halasa said the plastic, polymer, I would say the BPA, the phthalates, those are the endocrine disruptors, the mimics of estrogen. I mean, they are blocking up various places, detox pathways. They are blocking up, or they are over activating estrogen receptors that shouldn't be activated, or they are underactivating them like a partial agonist when estrogen is needed, especially in women, or disrupting the testosterone. And the big aha with that is that that affects all of the organs. It's not just the pancreas or just the adrenals. It's that mimicking process is affecting vitamin D conversion, thyroid conversion from T4 to T3. Um, Basically, every conversion you can think of. The vitamin D conversion in the kidney from its like the D2 to D3 to the active calcitriol form. It's decreasing the reuptake, acting like a reuptake inhibitor. No, it's not. Those estrogen disruptors also decrease dopaminergic tone in the brain. It acts as the opposite of, it blocks our natural dopamine reuptake inhibitors. I guess that's a way to put it. Bottom line, it's going to affect our neurochemistry, which is going to affect our autonomic nervous system and our thinking. And it's also overgrowth versus balanced growth and maturity with progesterone buffering the estrogen. And so then if you have genomic instability, you have all of these stressors along with electromagnetic frequencies and different 5Gs and who knows, that are all playing a role as stressors and these chemicals that are disrupting our entire hormone system. Then the metals that are disrupting all of those metabolic pathways inside of the cell that affect the B vitamin metabolism, that affects the detoxification pathways or the activation of autophagy, and how our mitochondria actually, how they switch from preserving energy and burning energy. That's how we can get stuck in mTOR and basically just get stuck into growth, but not necessarily the good growth. I guess you could call it overgrowth, without being able to clean up the cell or to burn up fuel efficiently. So it really all makes sense. It's all playing on each other and all at some level creating an acid terrain, since that's what I was talking about. And if you can buffer that acid terrain, know where you stand, and you realize if you stay at a certain pH, you are going to be sick. It's just a matter of how long, because you're going to constantly be in a degenerative state, a fermentating state. And if you go deeper into this, you'll see that we really are just a regenerative or a degenerative entity, if you want to see it from that we are either regenerating or degenerating. And if you're consistently acidic terrain, you are degenerating. Your structural integrity is breaking down. Then you become leaky, then you cannot produce energy, and that starts the degenerative cascade. So if you're going to turn the corner, you're not going to necessarily be able to do 100 sit-ups. You don't have that kind. You'll flare up even more because you're leaky. You can't burn. You don't have the energy to begin with. If you're going to turn the corner and you don't know what to do, which most people don't, one thing that you can do is go, aha, I have an acid terrain. I'm going to have some baking soda in water, have a teaspoon of baking soda in water first thing in the morning and before bedtime, especially before bedtime, because that's when the acidity really accumulates, because you just start to become static. You're still metabolizing like a car, but things aren't moving. I mean, you're not helping them to move like you would during the day. Things are getting sticky, and yes, our blood and our lymph is sticky with everything it's exposed to. So one thing you can do is baking soda and water first thing in the morning, and in the after and before bedtime. And if you have a really good natural mineral, um, something that we to put in the water, minerals will all, and you drink it throughout the day. Minerals also help to alkalize. Plus, you need the extra minerals because you're leaking them out, and you need to consider the lipid supplements. You need to buffer the redox, methylene blue, NAC, glutathione, wherever is appropriate for the person, and modulate the inflammation, the TH17, amlexinox, dimethyl fumarate. I think we need to start to take a second look at for people who are further down the inflammatory highway, so to speak. Amlexinox and dimethyl fumarate. Dimethyl fumarate, especially because it helps to reduce the amount of lactic acid production. It reduces the Warburg effect and helps to shuttle more pyruvate through, or to turn glycolysis more towards pyruvate, and try to reboot that citric acid cycle, and get that mitochondria started. And it's like a steroid without being a steroid, like Amlexinox. All the benefits of a steroid without, while at the same time turning on AMPK and turning off, which is a switch between mTOR and AMPK. That's what it is. It's a switch. You want to turn the switch in the other direction, which will increase insulin sensitivity. And then, like Dr. Halasa said, however you do it, I'm a big fan of Clotho that might be out, which actually is the most natural way, the best, put it like this, the best advantage a person could have, because its primary role is in the structural integrity of the cell wall. That's what the greatest anti-aging protein, the animals that live 700 to 800 human years, apparently, why would they never get sick? Why would they not? Well, we don't know for sure. It's just what I've heard for many years. Their risk of death does not go down with each passing year. They do not lose their fertility, apparently. And the one thing that they have going is that they produce Clotho their whole life. We don't. Ours goes down, and it goes down further with chronic disease, and it's directly correlated with hormones, testosterone, estrogen, adrenals, every single thing you could think. Vitamin D production, parathyroid, bone health, muscle metabolism health, inflammation, oxidative stress, and yes, insulin resistance. Insulin, and I just got an insulin level with a patient. Both insulin was high, and the C peptide was high, which is sort of like the production inside of the pancreatic cell, showing that that is still produced. It's being overproduced, but not yet becoming diabetic. It just means that there's insulin resistant. The pancreas producing more of the precursors of insulin, which is resulting in more insulin to try to get the job done, because the insulin receptors are becoming compromised. And so you can see how this sort of plays together, because that's connected to the structural integrity. There's and levels of oxidative stress, but that levels of oxidative stress and acid terrain result in more structural integrity issues, breakdown of the shape of the cell, the polarity of the cell, the leaking of the cell, the receptors pushing up against each other. And guess what? Clotho is the prime determinant of the structural integrity of the cell. Why? Because it was named after the Greek goddess that weaves the thread of life. It helps to lay down the glycocalyx of the cell, in a symmetrically geometric, mathematically correct way. Then the receptors will also be correct and symmetric in function. I think that's a huge advantage when you're dealing with all of the issues that we're dealing with. And then, of course, there are the terzepatides of the world. I think that's a reasonable one and better than semaglutide, but just has to be done right with caution. They cannot up the dose sooner than they're supposed to. That's where people get in trouble. And I think it's best to do it as a means to get to a better place where you're exercising more, where you can really push yourself like a real athlete. That still is the ultimate. Once you can do that and you know what to eat, when and why, and we should try to really understand the why so that we're not just saying, oh, just exercise and diet, and we're still ignorant. Doesn't make any sense. But alkalinic diet, you can see where that comes from. But with that, I think I've
What's
pretty much covered that.
frustrating about tonight, okay, is on the call while they're talking about very interesting things, there's only 13 people.
That's not too bad. I mean, it seems like
Deserve
normal, right?
better. But
What,
they're hammering on the same thing. And I think you've got to educate your patients, educate your children. And when people are stuck in a hospital, instead of listening to the damn cable TV all day, they should be getting educated about their condition.
well, yeah, I mean, the right way.
And if Dr. Goldman picked a topic about superhuman society, he should get on and explain what it is,
Well,
because
yeah.
there's all kinds of connotations and nuances.
Well, and it's the nuances. It's where I like to make things clear and
Yeah, well,
to define and to
yeah,
connect them so that you can see how they're
okay,
all
I
play,
get
how they
it,
make
I get
sense,
it.
right? Yeah.
But my point is, you have to tailor it to your market, and people can take it the wrong way. You don't want it to be an ubermensch or genetically superior. It's balancing and optimizing your epigenetics. And they're talking about sophisticated concepts that no one's going to understand that easily.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So that's what
obviously,
I mean, you're not listening to it. I'm making a recording. But my point is, I mean, why every freaking weekend, every week, I mean, do they have 12 to 20 people where Clearfield can get a lot, 30, 40, 50?
well, they do
That's
what
what I'm
works,
wondering
and
about. Yeah,
I understand. I mean, the reality is that it's unpopular. Truth. Now, don't get me wrong. This is in
and that should
general.
be on
But
World Health.
the more logical and the
So we
more
got to get
accurate
a way
information
to figure
is,
out
the less
market
popular that
participation.
this planet receives it. It's not attractive to
Oh
have
yeah, I did.
to have
So how do you get them to give a
real,
fuck?
like real broken down, true. As close to truth. I mean, that you can get. That's like the opposite of
Um,
what the foundations of this world is built upon.
and unfortunately, what you're saying
And it's
is,
unattractive. It's
you're
disgusting.
strange.
Yeah,
What's
so
that?
that's I mean, again, Dr. Joseph, I think,
It's
as
fun
you
to
were
have
saying,
a downhill battle
it
instead
it
of an
it
uphill
does
battle.
compromise the function of the cells and also the structure. And evidence of that, when you're running, and then you cannot run anymore, you feel like you cannot push it anymore. It's because of the building up of lactic acid, which stops the mitochondria from working. And yes, the
Hmm.
acidosis lead to depletion of potassium and magnesium, and
Um,
drinking alkaline water may help in
gotta see one day if Dr.
regaining.
Halasa likes chicken soup and matzo balls, gefilte fish and chopped liver.
Right. So basically, insulin in a normal level,
It's
it's
in our,
preventive and it's something that we need. But when
you
it
know,
comes into
and
high,
latkes
it
are
becomes
good.
it become pathologic, and we need to make sure.
People don't know what smokefish is here sometimes. How can you be from Chicago and go somewhere people don't understand smokefish?
Right. So we need to make sure that the
Hard to
people,
believe, you know?
there is a difference between normal
And you know what Halasa and Joseph technically talk about is exquisite, but are they really getting through to people?
Well, no, because it's not attractive.
Um,
You know, I try to do
How
it.
do we get through, you know?
Well,
And we have the same people on all the time
well, and they're just probably
listening.
have it turned on and doing something else anyways. I'm sure there's a couple
And
people
you
tuned
see
in.
that. You saw that the other week,
Yeah. Well, I mean, we need somebody that is more of
you know?
emotional, operates emotionally and has that high energy and gets
There's a
people
what?
fired up. Oh, somebody who communicates more
Yeah,
emotionally. That really is the way. Who's more of a group oriented
which is
person by nature. Where me,
can,
I'm good for intellect.
okay, text it to me and I'll try to see it.
Sheldon, I
Okay,
think you're
so
muted.
can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, I
Okay.
think for the past few weeks we have talked about
Multitasking.
insulin.
I know.
We have talked about
So we got to
insulin.
figure out what's
Well,
Sheldon.
go ahead,
yeah.
Dr. Benoit.
You're not muted. Bernard is talking. Let him
Okay,
talk.
good.
I think Shell is talking to
And we
someone.
got to
So
bring Carlos back to life.
Yeah,
somehow.
he's talking to somebody else. Yeah,
can we mute
I'll
him
mute
or
him.
something?
And I texted Dr. Joseph about the place where his wife
Let me
is
see.
across the street where he tried
Mute.
sleeping there.
Oh Lord.
See if it's not a center.
Okay,
Okay.
he's talking to somebody else.
Yeah, he's not talking to the group here. So I said the past few weeks I've been listening to the insulin hypothesis and all of that, but I think there's something missing. We all know about the glycemic index, but nobody has covered what I call lipogenic index. And I have come up with this term lipogenic index, meaning how quickly a food or group of foods convert into fat. So glycemic index, how quickly a food consumed becomes glucose in the body, and then that triggers insulin. But how do the foods that we consume become fat? So there are a lot of processes that go along with it. For instance, if we take McDonald's how do you call it, sandwich, uh, where there's a triple meat sandwich or etc., what does it contain? Well, it contains bread, which is carbohydrates. It contains fatty meat, and it contains fat oil that is used to cook it. So this meal is a whammy. Why? Because it does have the carbohydrates that would trigger the insulin to go up, but also it has the fat that can be stored easily. So when the insulin opens up the fat cells, then the fat will accumulate. The fatty component will go directly into the fat cells and become fat. So if you look at American diet, you can see many examples of this type of food that we eat all the time. And that is what is driving the obesity. Now, if you couple that with toxicity, which means the estrogen toxins in our environment, which I have demonstrated that majority of the toxin that we have in our food, in our water, they all mimic estrogen. Those estrogenic toxins, they make the insulin go up. So when you have too much insulin around and you're eating foods that are composed of carbohydrates and fat, all of a sudden everybody is ballooning. And that's why obesity, we cannot control it unless we fundamentally change the American diet, which is composed of carbohydrates and fat. So that's one point I wanted to make. And I came up with the lipogenic index. So when you calculate that index, if it's greater than 1, that means the food that you're going to eat is going to quickly convert into fat.
Right. It also has to do with people. If you have high insulin, then all the food that you're going to eat to turn into fat because insulin will push it in, and it will inhibit the lipolysis. So insulin also does have effect on the more you have insulin, the more that your food will turn into fat. That's another factor to determine whether your food that you're going to eat is going to be turned into fat or not.
But sometimes you can have a low glycemic food, but that low glycemic food also has a high lipogenic index. And that food is going to convert into fat no matter what we say. For instance,
Yes, because well, again, it's low lipogenic and it's toxic and it causes insulin resistance. It will lead to insulin high. So not necessarily that insulin high because of eating carb. You can eat toxic food and you will have insulin resistance and you have insulin up. So insulin
correct.
up or high is not necessary because of eating sugar as a
Right.
response, but
Yeah,
also toxins leads to insulin resistance, regardless of the contents of the carb of the food.
yeah, we agree with that. So that means if you have toxins in your food, those toxins can trigger the insulin to go high.
Right, because it will
And
blocks the
what,
insulin
yeah,
receptors. It's
when you, yeah,
oxidation.
exactly. And when you have high insulin, any food that has high lipogenic index is going to turn into fat, no matter what. So
Right,
you can eat a low carb diet thinking that you're doing great, when actually on the other hand, you have a fat component that is driven into the fat cells.
right. Because the insulin will those fat that you eat, it will go in and will not break. You need somebody to lower the insulin so it will cause lipolysis and break out. But insulin is keeping it to be fat and store it, and there is no compliance there, no flexibility in the cells. They will be in a status of storing and a status of no autophagy, and the cells are growing, and it will the insulin and cortisone, estrogens, those three things, and including histamine, they are feeding each other in a
So,
positive loop.
correct. So my contention is that insulin is not coming ex nihilo, means out of nothing. Insulin is coming because of the toxins in our environment,
Right.
primarily.
Because of the oxidation of the insulin receptor.
Exactly, because we have a lot of toxins, and
Right.
those toxins are driving the hyperinsulinemia, and that is driving the obesity. And that's why we cannot control the obesity as long as we have toxins in the environment. So, what is the priority here would be, I think tomorrow's medicine is going to be a detox medicine. I keep on saying that. Why? Meaning, if we take out the toxins, then we have no more insulin or spikes, or at least very low insulin spikes, and therefore we can control the obesity and all of those problems that we have.
Right. So that's the reason. Well, if you start with low carb, and people will say, "I'm not losing weight anymore, although I'm using low carb," right?
Right. Yep.
Because of the toxins that they're eating is blocking the insulin receptors, and insulin is high, so the insulin is not dropping even with the sugar when you do low carb diet. And the reason, because it's all about the fact is those receptors of insulin is oxidized. Whether it's oxidized because of the insulin is high or oxidized because of those toxins, free radical generators that you're putting in the body. And free radical generators could be anything out there, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
from the leaky gut, from the
because
toxins you eat,
definitely,
estrogen. Yeah.
yeah, the toxins lead to oxidative stress, and
Right.
therefore free radical regeneration. So everything revolves around the toxins, because before we saturated our environment with these toxins, people were not obese. Now
Right.
that we have so much toxins all of a sudden, especially since the mid 1990s, when we had glyphosate and all of these things coming into in form of GMOs and all of that, all of a sudden we cannot stop obesity. That's because of the toxins driving it. So I think our priority should be on detoxing, cleaning up the toxins from
So I
every
will
patient.
start. I will start with low. See, this is it's adding to each other, right? So it's easy to say low carb for now, and then detox. So let's start with low carb so we can patient feel better.
Yeah,
And
you can have low carb, but you will still gain weight if you have insulin. And
right.
as long as you have toxin, the toxins will
Yes.
drive
So I'm not
insulin.
saying low carbon only, but I can say when we start, we say, okay, let's start with low carb in your diet. That's the first thing. You feel better, which we will encourage you to do more, and also do at the same time detox. But tell them that low carb enough is not enough because you still have toxins causing insulin resistance.
Well,
So we need to go
well, let me jump in real quick. Dr. Benoit, I actually fundamentally agree with what you're saying. It's not about right versus wrong. I'm glad you brought it up because what we haven't focused on is, well, yeah, how do you detox? How do you get these heavy metals and all this BPA and endocrine disruptors out of the body? We never talk about it, which we are, I think, and we should. Well, we have to. Otherwise, we're missing the point.
Correct.
And at the same time, we're also trying to, from my end, trying to look at it, and this is, I think, what Dr. Halasa was alluding to, seeing it in the context of, okay, where do you start? Because there are situations where, like, I'm sure you've seen this, where the patient has their mast cells are very sensitive and activated, mast cell activation, and they're not ready to detox. They've got to be more stabilized. The inflammation or the overactive mast cells need to be stabilized, because if you try to pull out toxins, that's going to cause a like a Hersheimer reaction.
That,
So
that,
everything that's just
actually, I do that in clinic every day because I
oh,
see a lot of people who come with mast cell activation syndrome. So I give them my Tobin approach, which is the toxin overload, oxidative stress, hormonal imbalance, infections, and nutrient deficiencies. So then I concentrate on detox. I give them heal their gut. I give them a estrogen-free lifestyle because knowing that the estrogens are driving the insulin to go up, I give them the estrogen-free lifestyle, which is a bunch of things they should not do, and includes a lot of some of the major carbohydrates that they're eating, like gluten, grains, and all of those things that they gobble up all the time. I balance their hormones, and then I give them the nutrient that they need. Many times, if they have had COVID, they get mast cell activation syndrome because the COVID is triggering the IgG to trigger the mast cell to proliferate, or to trigger the mast cell to uh, degranulate. I mean to say. So in the essence, I'm tackling all the aspects, and that's why the patient do well. But if you do only one thing, they're not going to do well. So you have to have several pronged approach to the patient treatments,
right.
and that is what works best. So you have to start with the detox right away. You have to give them the nutrient they're lacking, and you have to fix their hormones.
Right. No, it has to be multiple approach,
Yeah.
seeking all the sources of the free radicals, like tires with many holes. You cannot just fix one hole. But where are we going to start? Low carb is a good start because it's easy to kind of help the patients feel immediately after that better. And then you continue with all the project of detoxing and finding the priority where the most toxic part of his body, because it's this variety of it. And that's where the history and physical exam will definitely lead to prioritize even the detox part. And that's the reason I'm developing, a whole supplement line loaded at cyclodextrin, hoping that the cyclodextrin will help to detox the body from all these fat soluble toxins that we have. But anyway, let's go back to the lecture. And I think,
let me. I want to validate really quick what Dr. Benoit just said.
right,
You're exactly right, and there's more to detoxing. It's an art, and you see it all the time. You've got the clinical experience. You understand it deeply. Perhaps when there's a good time for you, if you're interested, I think we need your help in in the basics of the approaches, how you think about detoxing, the things that have worked, and why. I think we're desperately needing more insight into detox, more so, and don't take this the wrong way. that Dr. Halasa. More so than just all you need is cyclodextrin done. The whole world of detox is completely covered. I think if I had to give you my take, we don't know enough. Most of us don't know how powerful cyclodextrin is, but at the same time, we need to know more about detox than just cyclodextrin. But at the same time, we have to understand that there is a baseline standard for the chronic disease centers that will work more smoothly if we have a starting place. And yes, there's always the next level, but there has to be a basic fundamental, like acid terrain. Well, if you could do one thing to get started right away, you just put some baking soda in your water in the morning at nighttime. At least it's something, because to try to understand everything, it can be overwhelming. These are
Right.
starting places.
Yeah,
Yep.
just for simplicity sometimes, but
Yeah.
of course, all the steps that Dr. Benoit, and Monday, if you want to come, Dr. Benoit, and present, your methodology and how we start, and, based on what you start with, those process versus others, I think it's all personalized based on the patients. That gives you the idea about personalizing the steps to do. But when I say low carb, this is like standard for everybody. And then when I say cyclodextrin loaded supplement, this is standard, but then you need to go personalized, find out what's the toxins that the patient is overload the most, whether it's fat soluble or water soluble. And then based on his functional of his organs, kidney and liver, and his leaky gut and all that stuff, or the deficiency of vitamins or whatever. So it's more personalized to know, stepwise process, and possibly it puts in the pack, and recommend all, low gluten and all that stuff. All this inflammatories, insults in the food needs to be removed by exclusion. I think that's something that I know Dr. Steven, that I know is does a lot of exclusion of food, and don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat this, don't eat that. Although sometimes it become overwhelming for the patients, it's hard for them to follow in compliance, and that's the reason, it's all about the interactions and how the patients is complying with your recommendations. But keep doing something in the basis, and then personalize it step by step, and eventually it will lead to something productive. But again, just
Yeah.
going back to the slides and ending up. But Dr. Benoit, if you want to have next Monday, please come and let's learn from you.
Yeah, okay. So I will see. Monday, if I can do a presentation, I will do that. And I will show you the lipogenic index. I will show you the combination of foods that actually are driving the obesity. I can show you the toxins that are driving the insulin to go up and all of those things.
Right. And I agree with you 100%. I just want to make sure the insulin is not being mistaken. If it's low and normal, it is for its longevity drug. We need it at a physiological level, because we still need to have some free radicals, and we need to stimulate them toward. But when it's high and it's constant, actually it's pathologic, and especially it stimulates the inflammasomes, which means you have too much inflammations, and this inflammation leads to degeneration. So the opposite of what longevity it's all about. And
But
it keeps
the people doping on this insulin, some of them already have high insulin. And why are they adding more insulin to the high insulin they have due to the toxin that they have in their body?
Yes, and that's what they do. They're doping, and they're already having toxic in the body. And you can see them, those little. If you see those bodybuilders and has big abdomen, you show those people with big abdomen and they
Yeah.
look ugly. The bodybuilders. That's because they are doing excessive mTOR, and they have too much of visceral fat, and that doesn't look, pretty when you have big muscles and a big belly. So insulin forces glucose to go in, force amino acid. It also causes the potassium magnesium shifts, by the way, shifting outside. And it leads to acidosis, by the way. And yes, you will end up with depletion of magnesium and potassium. And that's the reason why people feel crampy all the time and feel muscle spasm. And the reason, because most of those people, when they say, I feel tighten, muscle spasm, get, that's because of the magnesium and potassium is being depleted from the acidosis, from the acidic train due to high insulin of that person. So insulin patient with insulin resistance, they complain from muscle spasm and pain in their muscles. It's just because of potassium magnesium. And yes, having bicarb, it prevents the leakage and acute losing of potassium magnesium. But it's not a root cause fix. This is more of, as Dr. Yusuf has said, is to keep them to start there and reduce the pain and the cramps of the muscles from the acid train and leaking of the potassium magnesium. And yes, too much of acidic, as I said, this is indication that insulin is blocking the mitochondria and they have fatigue, and the acidic compounded. It compounds the fatigue as well and causing brain fog. So it's because of insulin blocking the mitochondria. Mitochondria is not functioning, plus the acidic itself. It leads to the fog and the fatigue. And that's the reason, as I said, when you're running and then you run, and then you cannot run anymore because of the acidosis. And so you need to give time to get rid from the acidic for your mitochondria to gain its function. So the acidic does compromise the function of the body in general, all the organelles. And so we need to get rid from this excess of fat, of acidic as much as we can. So this insulin is causing artificial muscle pump, and it lead to rebound hypoglycemia, and eventually insulin stimulate the NOx, generate free radicals, causing further resistance to the insulin. So they need more insulin, and those people, they start doping with muscles and getting more insulin dosage because of the positive feedback that it leads to more insulin resistance. And so all those are the drugs that they use, whether rapid acting or short acting or long acting, which is more deadly ones because it leads to hypertrophy of the blood vessels and hypertension, plus it leads to hypertrophy of the heart, and they end up with myopathy and they die from it. Plus, there is a chance they will die from hypoglycemia or from the electrolytes imbalance, especially with hyperkalemia. And they end up with confusion, disorientation, all this because of electrolytes imbalance that can lead to seizures sometimes and loss of conscious, and it may lead to sudden death. Insulin shifts the electrolytes extracellular. It leads to, at the beginning, it pushes it leads to hyperkalemia in the beginning. But then what happens is the urine will lose all of this potassium. Then you will end up with hypokalemia. And that leads to arrhythmia. It leads to hypomagnesium because you're losing the magnesium in the urine. So you have low potassium and magnesium. So you need potassium and magnesium supplement, or you need to give them, as I said, sodium bicarb to prevent the leakage, because the potassium and magnesium goes with acids, with the urine acidity. And, drinking bicarb may help to retain those electrolytes. It leads to muscle paresis and spasm. And of course, this electrical imbalance may lead to cardiac arrest, in addition to the hypertrophy of the cardiac as well. Let's not forget that. For long-acting term insulin abuse causes insulin resistance because it generates free radicals, causing oxidation of insulin receptors and further leading to hyperinsulinemia. And then hyperinsulinemia leads to visceral fat. You can see the big belly, and it leads to deposition of fat in the liver. So you end up with the fatty liver. And so people with fatty liver, they think, oh, I have fatty liver, I have liver enzyme. They start focusing on the liver. Or people, they may have hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, and then they have stimulation of exenatase enzyme, and that leads to have high uric acid. Oh, they have gout. The reality is those gout and liver and fatty liver or liver is being damaged is because of the root cause, which is insulin resistance. So in order to fix and reverse that, you don't need to, if you're giving allopurinol and giving something for the liver, yeah, it may help, but the reality is that you need to go to the root cause, because once the root cause is being fixed, then you can fix the whole problem. Even they may have some sort of anemia because of the iron, they start depositing the fat of the abdomen, and they will have some sort of inflammatory anemic. And so people say, oh, let's give them iron. And sometimes they this oxidative stress affect the methylation and say, oh, the methylation problem, microcytic. Oh, let's go ahead and B12. Well, if you see the root cause, it's all because of the insulin resistance, and we can fix that, then we can fix all the other conditions that is caused by the hyperinsulinemia. So fatty liver, uric acid high, anemia possibly. It's all caused by insulin resistance. And we know that insulin itself, it inhibits the autophagy of the inflammasome, cancer cells, senescent cells, which leads to the risk of those cells to proliferate, and cancer and inflammasome leads to degeneration. It increases the glycans, right, because of the oxidative stress that they stimulate directly. They drive the inflammaging because they inhibit the autophagy of the inflammasomes. And what happened with this is actually shorten up the lifespan. And then it accelerates the vascular aging because the free radicals damage endothelium, leading to the plaques and oxidizing the fat and oxidizing the glucose and causing the smooth muscle to hypertrophy. All of this is it leads to accelerating the cardiovascular problems and aging and lead to progression of cardiovascular diseases. And in addition to that, insulin is a soil for cancer to grow. It compromises the immune system that kills the cancer, which Th1 and Th7 and Th1 and cytotoxic T cells. Means that there is a chance that the cancer will grow. And if you have a cancer and we have high insulin, oh, that's a good thing. That will stimulate the more of the cancer. And also it changes the tumor microenvironment in a way that it will encourage the cancer to grow. It stimulates the fibrosis, squeeze the blood vessels, stimulate abnormal angiogenesis, and all of this, we can say the insulin is a soil, is a metabolic soil for the cancer. So the difference is that we still can use insulin when the patient has hyperglycemia, especially in acute conditions, yes, to lower the sugar, but we need to work on increasing the insulin sensitivity so that we don't rely on giving insulin for long term if we can, as much as we can. And we want to wean patients from taking insulin, diabetic type 2, looking for a way to increase insulin receptors, even using GLP-1s. So there is an ethical use of insulin. Still, we need it, especially if the patient is failing to produce insulin in the beginning. Type 1 diabetes, still you need to use insulin to normalize the sugar. Yes, we need it. And also insulin in a physiological level is very important for regeneration and growth. Without it, we cannot stimulate the mTOR. And we need some free radicals to stimulate the gene expression of synthesis of the protein. So you need it for growth, but it has to be at physiological level. So a false belief insulin makes cell young, that's not true. And when it's excess, no. But no, when normal level, yes. Normal physiological level, yes. But super physiological insulin level, it's the opposite because it stimulates the inflammasomes and inflammation and all the problems. And it locks the cells into growing and mTOR constant, plus stimulation of NOx and free radicals, constant high free radicals, constant mTOR. That's the good environment for cancer. So superphysiological insulin has premature aging effect. It inhibits the longevity promotion, which is AMPK, killing the inflammasome and cancer cells and aging cells. So in high abnormal pathological level of insulin, it is an aging drug. And low physiological level, it is an anti-aging. So it's a sword with two edges. It's a sword with two edges. In normal low, yes. High, but high, it's an aging drug when it's high. So longevity performance required. Low basal insulin, yes, we need it for anabolic signaling, to reduce the glycation, to preserve, and repair the physiology. All of this and normal, but high, it's not good. Because it leads to all the opposite. It's the aging process and inflammation and cancer. So we need to keep the insulin as low as much as we can, and we need to increase the sensitivity to the insulin receptors. And if we do that, we can have what we call the metabolic flexibility of the cells, where we can stimulate the healthy cells and kill the inflammasome and senescent cells and cancer cells. Is that what we need? We need to switch. able the cells to switch and able to die, especially those aging cells. We don't want to keep the aging cells forever, and that flexibility needs to be maintained. Otherwise, we have a problem, and we don't want to keep the cells storing fat. We need to also the cells needs to use those fat and burn it and break it down, because too much of fat in the cells will suffocate the cells. That's what's happening in the fat cells in the visceral. And that leads to, when you suffocate the cells because of too much of fat and mitochondria has been impaired, then the visceral fat will start secreting free radicals and interleukin 6. So again, the safest way is to the alternative to the insulin doping is exercise. Exercise induced the increase in the muscle mass, glucose receptors. Exercise increases the MPA activation as well and killing up inflammasomes and cancer cells. Exercise will help to increase the mitochondria, mitogenesis, and the right nutrition, which is, fruit and vegetables and nuts. And fasting as well will help to stimulate the MPK and inhibit mTOR and kill all those inflammasomal cancer cells and stem cells. So when we eat, the insulin goes up, it stimulates the healthy cells. But then we need to lower the insulin so we give a chance to kill the inflammasomes senescent cells. So the cycling of mTOR activation and inhibition, it's very important. And this cycling, it needs to be maintained. And giving insulin all the time will put the cells in a stage of mTOR and storage and lose their flexibility. And then those inflammasomal cancer cells and stem will not die. And so fasting is great. Exercise induced muscle growth and increase the glucose transporters. We need to give chance for MPAK activations, which happen during the fasting. And I think that's the best option to really, the healthy methodology for the body is not to push the cells to grow, is to push the cells to grow normally. But at the same time, you need to have a chance to kill the bad cells and allow the healthy cells to grow. So fasting, things that we need to monitor all the time is fasting insulin, C-peptide, the HOMA, hemoglobin A1C, continued monitor of glucose, continued monitor of lactic acid as well, and the triglyceride HDL ratio needs to be normalized. And too much of insulin can lead to abnormal high triglyceride, and it also affects the level of high density lipoprotein. It lowers it. So we need to make sure that we are switching. So spark of insulin is good, constant high, it's bad. And so ethically, it's not ethical to give insulin. For athletic liabilities, cheating, I consider it. It leads to sudden death because of electrolytes imbalance, especially with potassium. It leads to insurance and legal consequence. It leads to physician malpractice, and it is prescription misuse. So insulin doping creates short-term appearance. Yeah, they look nice and big muscles, but a long-term metabolic debt, which is, affecting everything and speeding the process of aging and dying, and causing cardiomyopathy, causing vasoconstriction, growth of the smooth muscles of the blood vessels, hypertension. Insulin doping is dangerous, obsolete. Performance without insulin excess, longevity require insulin sensitivity. So increase insulin sensitivity. Don't give more insulin, but work on increasing sensitivity of insulin. And you can do that with berberine, metformin, GLP-1, acarbose, and all those drugs that helps to increase the insulin sensitivity. And that's what we need to direct the doctors, even for the endocrinologists, to stop giving insulin without looking at how we can increase insulin sensitivity. And again, as Dr. Teno said, it's not about just low carb. Also, the toxins are free radical generators, and they can block the insulin receptors. That's why the people, they say, "Oh, we have low carb, and I cannot lose weight too." Well, you cannot lose weight because you're still having a problem, because you have these toxins that you're eating, and your food is blocking those insulin receptors, so it's not lowering the insulin, so you keep having the same weight, you're not dropping it. And that's the reason we need to look at all the strategies to detox the body. But needs to be done in a strategic way, because what detoxing you want to do? Is it fat soluble, water soluble? Which one is more? Depending on the history and physical exam of the patient, you prioritize where they are more heavily toxic. Or it could be because nutritional deficiency, vitamin D, methylation problem, anything. So you need to look and search to prioritize where is the source of the free radicals. Either it's become of the leaky gut, it becomes leaky gum, it becomes because of the fungus, it's because of heavy metals, it's because of low 6 hormones, it's because of petrochemicals that they are inside their body, microplastics. You really need to find and prioritize. And we know there's two forms of toxins, water soluble, fat soluble. We know the fat soluble, sweating or cyclodextrin. Water soluble is all those things, zeolite and EDTA and things that we know. And then yes, exclusion as well, food exclusions. Don't eat gluten rich diet, all those things that Dr. Teno hopefully will be presenting it next Monday. The strongest where is here? So the humans, the strongest of the humans of the future will master metabolism, not inject insulin. That's the superhuman. Superhuman, it's all about not duping insulin, but increasing the sensitivity of insulin. And that's the message that we need to give it to all the doctors who are trying to become superhumans, or all the patients, or all the individuals, all the people here, is to look at the method to increase insulin sensitivity, not by increasing insulin. And it's a problem, not just the non-medical use of doping thing or doping, insulin doping, but also the medical industry and the endocrinologists. And up to now, they are medically giving insulin in the wrong way, especially diabetic type 2. Instead of looking at the sensitivity of insulin, increasing it, they say, oh, no, you fail with the oral hypoglycemics. Okay, let's go ahead and switch them without looking exactly, maybe there's a way to increase the sensitivity of insulin. It's not just oral hypoglycemics, but look at all the factors that lead to blocking of the insulin and led to resistance to metformin. Metformin does not work because of the toxins that the patient is eating. So why we don't detox the patient, as Dr. Teno say, and they will benefit from metformin, and plus if you want to add GLP-1, and you're good. So that's the missing equation, is to find a solution for the insulin resistance, not to give them more insulin. So that's I think the message of tonight. Anybody has questions? We good?
No, I think that covers it. And I think it's important, especially for people who are doping the insulin if they don't know. And what I can say is it wasn't even obvious to me that the high insulin levels were the driver of multisystemic inflammatory, chronic inflammatory, and increasing cancer and all of the things, and neuroinflammation, and that it's not being looked at. And if your CRP is normal and your sedimentation rate is normal and your white count is normal, that doesn't say anything about chronic inflammation. Actually, like you said, measure the fasting insulin and the C peptide, and when you see that those are elevated, now you can say yes, that explains the inflammation. I mean, because the homocysteine might not even be elevated.
Well,
CRP is a marker of acute inflammation, systemic inflammation, not including the central nervous system, not including the brain and spinal cord.
the
So that
most
doesn't.
sensitive, because there's silence inflammation. All those markers of inflammatory, even oxidative stress, can be normal, and you still have silent inflammation undetected by all the biomarkers. Is the high insulin. High insulin causes the inflammation, but it's not detected by all the biomarkers that we know, and it's causing damage and oxidative stress without being manifested in all the biomarkers we have. That's the reason right now, if you go and you check and you say, what is the top biomarker that reflects the health optimization? That's indication that the patient is healthy. And they will say fasting insulin.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge.
Right.
And it took a while to see it. And stand out from all the in relationship to the other testing. It is the marker for longevity, chronic inflammation of the brain and the body, chronic, and the hypertrophic changes and cancer risk. The list goes on, and it's the one thing that really never was ordered routinely. It was just something perhaps the endocrinologist ordered, which is rare. I mean, it's not common compared to the general population, which probably the vast majority of people have an elevated insulin, fasting insulin.
So you can have a patient normalize everything and they feel sick, which I have some people that I know. Every biomarker in mainstream medicine is normal. Okay. And he's fat, like talking about 300 pounds. Okay. And every biomarker that we know in mainstream medicine is normal. What he has high is on the insulin. His blood pressure is normal, liver function is normal, everything is normal, but he's compensated, normally compensated. And insulin is compensating it because it's lowering the sugar and hemoglobin A1C. But the insulin is at the same time causing all the damage that is not noticeable because it's not manifested as inflammation that can be detected by the lab. The lab, we see it's normal. And they go, oh, yeah, you're normal. Everything is good. And he's fat, he's fatigued, right? His mitochondria is depleted, but it does not show in the medical thing. And that's the reason we are ahead of everybody here by saying if you have high insulin, you are inflamed, but it's silent inflammation that you don't detect it, but your blood vessels damage, fibrosis is progressing, and your parenchyma is and your mitochondria is not optimally function. It's actually inhibited by insulin.
Yeah. So
Your lactic acid terrain, which is lactic acid, the acidic terrain, the lactic acid, there's a company right now is doing the good continue lactic acid monitoring to detect that there is a problem. And those are very sensitive tests. And that guides us to really tell the patients you are healthy or not. Because everybody up to now, we are telling to abnormal patient, sick patient, oh, you're healthy, go home.
oh yeah, that's tragic, and that's another reason why maybe I come off kind of harsh, because I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of the nonsense. People are tired of being sick. I'm tired of being sick. Tired of the lies, and it's time to get things handled and get the truth. And when you know
No,
the
you
truth,
come off as
you can
real
back
and
it up.
genuine.
Yeah, genuine, because you can explain it. Otherwise, it just becomes he said that, she said that, they said. Well, they said that. Well, how come I haven't heard about it? When you have genuine information, it's explainable, and it's usually not that difficult. Once you understand, none of this is difficult. It's difficult when you're trying to figure out why because everything's wrong. That's when things are confusing. That's why it takes 20, 30, 40 years of medicine and still nobody seems to know anything. Whereas if we just had the genuine information, we would know it. It wouldn't be such a mystery. So it is what it is. That's the way our world works. But at this point, I think I've had enough. So you get to hear genuine from me. That's the gift I like to say I give, like it or not.
Yeah, but you have a context and a plan of action then.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not the purpose of being clear. If I don't know something, I don't know. If I'm 90% sure, or if it's this is my thoughts on it, I'm just being mindful to make sure I clarify how I think about it, because that's just something I've committed to. It's just that's what I want it to be about from here on out, because the confusion is just it's driving people crazy, and there is truth out there. You got to get things sorted out, and that's what we do.
Yeah, there's no shortage of craziness.
No, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable, and people can't even tell the truth from the nonsense. I mean, it's like, come on, you know. So that's my commitment, is to stick with, not sugarcoating, not sleight of hand, or any of the stuff that was somehow considered to be normal. Not anymore. That's not acceptable, and at least that's the pressure I put on myself, to just make sure I'm clear where, why I'm saying what I'm saying. How well do I know it? Is it hearsay? Is it he said, she said? And that's it. So, all right, guys, this was fun.
Well, well, I raised my hand. I have one comment. I put in the chat, I want to backtrack, and there's questions for Dr. Halasa and Dr. Stefan. How do you or would you teach your kids about the effects as well as the consequences of nutrition, about happy meals and unhappy meals, how one can turn into the other? As Dr. Joseph was talking about how our cell walls can transform either way. And in hospitals, speaking as a former patient, patients lie around listening to cable TV, not usually health education about their health and condition, especially unhealthy conditions. What part is education a component of treatment? Should it be? Yeah. And is
Well,
there an interrelated disruption chain of events?
I've got my own answer for it. It's try to avoid going to the hospital. And we have to. We're going to have to take our health into our own hands. Unfortunately, when I've dealt with my mother at the hospital, and I hear the same thing from other people, it's common. You cannot get through to anybody. You're dealing with the pod people, unfortunately, and those are people who are psychologically controlled, and they don't know it. That
Yes.
that's
Conditioned,
they're
conditioned.
they're conditioned,
Right.
with maybe some enhanced conditioning. But you cannot speak rational. But they would not put, they don't know the difference between hydrocortisone and solumedrol, and they will act arrogant and like they know when they don't know. See, that's where that being authentic part is really damaging to them, because I can see right through it. I know what they know and what they don't know because I was there. I know that they can't, especially when they can't actually verbally say what's the difference between solumedrol and hydrocortisone. But it almost cost her her life because she could not breathe, because her muscles were not strong enough. She didn't have the energy. And solumedrol, what it does, it peaks and then it shuts off. That peak has a negative feedback on the adrenals, shuts it down more. So you don't get the longer life. If you are, put it like this, if you have adrenal failure, we're not talking about an asthma attack or allergies or acute inflammation. You you need to treat. You need endocrine on the case, because they don't know all this stuff. But they took it upon themselves to just do solumedrol. That's not the treatment for adrenal failure. It's hydrocortisone through the IV. When you cannot produce enough cortisol, you cannot maintain your blood pressure. You cannot. You talk about fatigue. You know where fatigue comes from? It comes from lack of cortisol, lack of adrenal hormones, and but especially cortisol, which is hydrocortisone. Hydrocortisone is turns into cortisol, and there's nothing you can do. You can't say anything, because they all are either conditioned to follow the protocol, and at the same time, because they're doctors, they cannot accept the fact that they don't know what they don't know. They can't have a reasonable conversation with a colleague, with another physician, whether the patient is a physician, whether I'm the physician, I'm not on staff there, but I'm licensed in the state. I'm just not on staff at that hospital. They will not listen to a word you say. And what will happen to your parent or loved one or whoever it is, you're not going to be able to do anything. So my point is we're going to have to, if somebody were to ask me what my stance is, we're going to have to learn how to take care of ourselves. That's a fact. Okay, we're not going to be able to change the hospitals or give advice as because you can't do anything. It's very, very difficult. It's like being at the airport. Whatever they say is what it is. You can't do anything about it. Don't try to fight. Try to fight it, but you're dealing with the pod people. They can't think for them. They're under control. I think there was another one about where to start with, or how do you know which about how to start changing diet and lifestyle. The reality is we need to get specific with diet, and we've got to get out of old school thinking about food. The food we're eating isn't food. It's something else. It's, anytime you're eating grapes and it doesn't have seeds, or gosh, I can't begin to tell you how many things are suspicious. Put it like this: somebody who I respect, who runs an alternative group out of another state. Actually, is not part of our group. He said about 1% of the food of Publix is edible, and I believe it because well, you know, I look under the microscope. Seeing is believing. Sometimes seeing is a lot better than imagining, based on studies. But it's true. I would err on the side of knowing some farmers. I'm working on it. I've got some connections to try it. You put it like this: in a normal world, you shouldn't have to worry about food. Shouldn't be so complicated. So we can't use the same thinking. Oh, just avoid the carbs, and because we don't know what the complex carbs are made of, including the meat, especially the meat. So I think that's something we're going to have to break the ice with and not be afraid to speak about the reality, and if anything, not resort to reflex responses. We all have them where it's just easier to say, well, it's complex carbs. Well, no, we got to get specific, and we got to realize that not all food is made the same, and most of it is not good. That's a problem. And if so, maybe this group, maybe the purpose is so that we can help each other out. Well, where can we find better food? How about that one? How about that benefit? How about that being one of the perks of being a part of the uh, the master race, whatever it's called, the uh, superior performance group.
Unfortunately, Dr. Joseph, where you are, there's no Amish people. So you go to the Amish farm and you buy the food directly from them.
Okay. No, I like it. And how can we know, that their food is not
Oh
contaminated
yeah,
by
yeah.
the
And you go there,
environment?
but don't use chemical. There's a group of them that use chemicals, but others don't. So you
I
have
Okay.
to.
treat Amish for 5 years. I go to their places in Pennsylvania,
Right.
Lancaster, and I
Yeah.
stay with them the weekends. And
Right.
yes, they are, they don't use electricity. They're trying to list chemicals,
That,
and their food is relatively healthier
right.
than what you're getting from the store. There's Amish store there out there we have next to us here. I think that's one way to go, although they're cheating sometimes, and
Some
they
of
have
them.
fungus infection. That's the problem with their recruits, and we need to figure out what's the best option for the disease of the plants, or in other words, those infestations, without using the chemicals. And we need to advance that technology, and I think that's where the movement is how you can kill those infestations without introducing chemicals to those groups, because the reason why those farmers, they cannot really make money if they don't use the chemicals to kill the infestations. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
And
And I'm just being devil's advocate because I happen to author, several videos over the past year on toxic fog. And guess what? It's not just Florida. I know that everybody wants to think it's everything I say is the exception. Everything else on the planet is normal. But the reality is there are people who have cultured the air. Okay, they've collected samples from various places, and it's not good. And my point is not to be overly critical. That's a great first step, because it's possible for that food to be contaminated, which it would have to be if it's out in the open. It's not them spraying stuff on it, it's coming from other places. The best way to is actually get a microscope and look under the microscope. But that's just my little opinion. Seeing is believing. I'm always looking and keeping my eyes out for the next level are those who are aware of that issue, and they have taken certain measures to be able to protect their crops, or perhaps they're growing a certain percentage of them inside, some sort of a greenhouse environment, with non-GMO seeds. I think the chances of us finding, really, really, really good food is it's going to be much more rare. But I do like the idea. Start with the Amish. Think about them first until you get to find out until you get to the next level of what's available. That's just my take.
Dr. Tano, can we get the Amish to grow African yams?
Oh, actually, they're willing to do anything. When I was in Wisconsin, we used to go to the Amish farm. I'd drive 40 miles out of town, go to the Amish farm, and buy direct from them. So one of them, when they knew me, he wanted to grow sweet potatoes for me. So he went to the co-op to buy the Japanese sweet potato, which is the purple skin ones, and he wanted to grow that. Yeah. So once you know them, they try to help. They try to be very nice to you, and that's why the Amish they're good. So I personally think it would be good if we all know where they are and we can go to their farms and chat with them and figure out how they're doing things. So I wanted to create a website. I call it Farm to Healthcare. And Farm to Healthcare meaning we make a site where all the organic food producers in the whole country or the whole world congregate, and people can find organic food. Because as it stands now, currently we don't have such a site where people can go worldwide to get organic food. So every country, there are people who are doing organic farming, but we don't know them. So if we had a place where they can be found, and we can, if you are in a state, we can go directly or call them and they can ship whatever you need to you, then you have your organic food right there.
Yeah, you have a dynamically updated database.
Exactly. Some people are doing that partially, but I think it should be an effort to do worldwide. So then we can be a little healthier than what we're doing now. In
Well,
1990,
we need worldwide education to support this too.
right. So in 1990, when
Yeah.
Congress passed the Organic Food Production Act, they did not put any bone on the back. So there's no backbone to it. And nobody's producing the organic food, and people are not they're not enforcing that law. I think consumers should demand better because we our health matters. Why are we accepting all of this junk that the farmers are giving us, and they don't care? Because I see them.
It's part of WAC education.
Yeah, I see them in the Midwest. They come to the office, they themselves, they're having problems. I tell them about the farming system. They say, well, you're killing my livelihood. I'm not coming to you anymore. So if they're
Oh,
willing to
God.
die for the money or whatever they're doing, what about us? Who cares? So our health matters. So we have to form groups and take that in our own hands because the government is not capable of forcing these farmers to do anything at all.
Well, I want to comment to Dr. Joseph on the same vein that with artificial meats, we can have dysfunctional Rouleau burgers.
Dysfunctional what?
Rouleau burgers.
Yeah, I guess
ROLLDAU.
I guess that's a good way we could that's a catchy name, but
We
yeah,
see that on the slides.
well, yeah, the reload. Look, we're not oxygenating. People's blood looks like crap. I mean, I mean, god awful terrible. Okay,
And we have to
and
nourish our
but
nanoparticles.
and the thing is that at this point, if we continue not, we don't have to talk about the blood, but we need to talk about the food. If we don't, the reason why they keep thinking it's something else going on and not the contaminated food and water is because people are afraid to speak up or they're it's mind control. It's absolutely mind control. You can see it. There's nothing behind the eyes. Now, and I know it sounds far out, but it doesn't make sense for people to be so strange.
We have radioactivity in some water
So Dr.
supplies.
Joseph,
Yeah.
so recently some patients have been making comments, and it's quite unfortunate. When I go to clinic, I give them all the information about the toxicity, how they should avoid them, etc., what they should eat better. But many of them come back with a response, well, I cannot afford it. I'm poor, and he's telling me to go eat organic food that is so expensive. So this is the comment
Well, you can imagine. This is where I thrive. This is where they get to hear the real truth. The
yeah,
real truth is, first of all, I didn't tell you what the price was, so don't assume that it's not affordable.
right.
Number two, if you're having difficulties, let me help you. There is a way to do this. That's affordable. There's always a way
Well,
to
but
get
don't
around.
even tell you about that.
And
They're
number
going,
three, and
they're
number
going
three,
right. They're going
no,
right about that.
and number three, I tell them, obviously it's not the right time for you now. I
Right,
don't think this is for you because you
right,
didn't even ask me how much it costs. You
right.
assume, and so I'm here. If but usually I say I don't think we're a match.
We're not a match. Yeah,
We're not a match.
go
I'm
somewhere else.
sorry.
Yeah,
It's
How,
true.
how expensive is
You know
a
how it's real? It's true. I don't think I'm the right doctor for you.
correct.
Although you did not ask me what the cost is. You assumed it wasn't affordable. But I think that there's a disconnect.
Correct.
And we're when and I'm not the right doctor for you. I want to be the right doctor for the right person at the right time.
It's quite
Yeah.
unfortunate. People are burying their heads in the mud, and they're not willing to hear anything at all because they put on the poor me mentality. Oh yeah, well I'm poor, I mean, so I cannot afford anything. I cannot. But some of these are called the Louis Vuitton.
And they never ask for the price. That's
I,
bullshit what they're saying.
also, I call it the Louis Vuitton paradox. Some of these people they're coming with a 10,000 handbag, $10,000 handbag, and there they say they cannot afford good food. What? What is?
Yeah. Then we're not a match. It's just like dating. It's like,
How
I'm
much is
not
a packet of
compatible with most
seeds?
women. And I'm brutal and honest about it because I know what the future will be. Just
Right.
like with the patients. I already know what kind of patients I attract. The other ones, their eyes blur over when I talk to them. As soon as I talk, their eyes blur over. There's no
Yeah.
connect. They're probably under mind control.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's nothing for me. I don't want them in my office because they're
Mhm.
gonna try to act superior, which they're not in my arena. Don't come to me. If you don't need my help, then go. Get away.
Dr. Joseph, how expensive is a packet of seeds and a bag of, good soil?
Well, first of all, it's about creating clarity because most people are so confused, including myself, confused about everything. I
Yeah.
had to go through the process, and through the process, I started to see with clear eyes. I started to see patterns and predictability. and what are the most important things that are happening? Okay, what's the real cause?
You ask, how did this get done to me?
Yeah, how did this, and I'm clear with them, and I explain it, and I show them I'm competent, and I show them what I don't know, and I show them what's important, what's really important, and if I don't know, am I going to be able to figure it out? Does anybody else know? I mean, it is about as raw and clear as it can get. And if they light up and they're like, thank goodness, finally, somebody that can actually back up what they're saying and actually explain it and actually admit when they don't know something. It's very appealing to the people I attract. And the rest of them, which is the majority of the population, they'll never be my patient. And I don't attempt to try because it's like marriage. You can't marry everybody. They're not the right match. They're
Yeah,
like a different species.
often seekers around the world are isolated, and we need to be brought together
Yeah,
and share knowledge.
I mean, I said I cannot please everybody. At least many of the patients appreciate the advice and everything I'm giving them and guidance. But the ones who don't want to accept that, they